This is a Best in Climate episode of Earth Feels, where each week your hosts Rose and Christine read to you from some of the best climate-related blogs and articles on the web.
Hello, Rose here. This week's Best in Climate comes to us from mongabay.com, and it is written by John C. Cannon, published on the 19th of February in 2021. It's entitled, UN Report Lays Out Blueprint to End Suicidal War on Nature. According to a new report from the United Nations Environmental Program, the world faces 3 environmental emergencies: climate change, biodiversity loss, and air and water pollution. UN Secretary General António Guterres said we should view nature as an ally, not a foe, in the quest for sustainable human development. The report draws on assessments that quantify carbon emissions, species loss, and pollutant flows to produce what the authors call concrete actions by governments, private companies, and individuals that will help address these issues. The world's leaders, private companies, and individuals must take a coordinated approach to address 3 environmental calamities facing the Earth at this moment, according to a report released February 18th by the UN Environmental Program, UNEP. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and air and water pollution have resulted from what UN Secretary General António Guterres said has been, quote, unsustainable production and consumption, end quote, threatening human health and the global system underpinning our society. Quote, without nature's help, we will not thrive or even survive. And for too long, we have been waging a senseless and suicidal war on nature, end quote. Guterres told reporters at the release of the report, Making Peace with Nature, quote, it's time we learn to see nature as an ally that will help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, end quote, referring to 17 targets that aim to reduce poverty by 2030. The UNEP report notes that human innovation has brought a staggering surge in wealth in recent decades. The world's economy is 5 times the size it was 50 years ago. In that time, humans have tripled both the extraction of natural resources and the output of lands under cultivation. But that prosperity has come at a cost, the brunt of which has been borne by the world's 1.3 billion poorest. The average global temperature is currently on track to rise by 3 degrees Celsius. That's 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit, over pre-industrial levels, owing mostly to the carbon that human activity has already released into the atmosphere. We've cleared away 10% of the world's forest cover since 1990, dispensing with a primary mechanism for keeping the quantity of atmospheric carbon in check and removing critical habitat for untold numbers of species. 1/8 of the world's plants and animals, about 1 million species in all, according to the 2019 research from the UN's Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Diversity and Ecosystems Services. And forests and other ecosystems have been removed to make way for agriculture, cities, and resource extraction. Legal and illegal hunting and fishing for traditional medicines and food, too, have whittled away species numbers. And scientists are currently tracking a precipitous decline in insect numbers, likely a knock-on effect of changing climate, higher chemical loads, and changes to their habitats. The industrialization and agricultural intensification that helped ignite the global economic boom have also sullied the air and the water we depend on. This pollution kills millions of people prematurely each year, again, primarily from the ranks of the world's poorest. Biodiversity loss, chemical pollution, and climate change represent 3 of the 9 planetary boundaries that scientists first proposed in 2009 as a way of assessing the risks that human activities pose to the Earth system. Calculations for each, such as the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere for climate change, provide a snapshot of whether we've crossed critical thresholds. That information could tell us how close we are to dangerously destabilizing the planet, and with it, the, quote, safe operating space for humanity, end quote, as the authors of the 2009 paper put it. According to that study and an updated 2015 paper on the planetary boundaries, the Earth has surpassed the safe limit for climate change. The loss of biodiversity, and specifically genetic diversity, is also well past the safe limit, potentially jeopardizing the integrity of the biosphere. But despite the grim statistics revealing the human toll of chemical pollution in the water and the air, scientists still don't have comprehensive data on human-made chemicals in the environment, their persistence, and the danger they pose to the global system. Drawing on recent assessments aimed at capturing the breadth and scale of these 3 environmental, quote, emergencies, end quote, the authors of the UNEP report set out to define what needs to be done to tackle them. In the preface, lead report authors Ivor Baste and Robert Watson write that, quote, the findings of the assessments are interlinked and add up to an unparalleled planetary emergency, end quote. Baste is with the Norwegian Environmental Agency, and Watson chairs the IPBES. Quote, the environmental emergencies that have been outlined in the report all flow directly from humanity's overconsumption resources, overproduction of waste, and prioritization of short-term gain with the consequences of long-term pain. Inger Anderson, executive director of UNEP, said at a press conference, but all is not lost. Serving as a blueprint for action, the report calls on governments to stop subsidizing the production of carbon-emitting fossil fuels in industrial agriculture and instead redirect those funds into sustainable livelihoods that don't put as much pressure on the climate. Anderson said putting a price on carbon emitted by countries and companies could help instigate the shift away from harmful practices and toward net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Quote, we know, let's be honest, that taxing pollution works, she said. Grappling with biodiversity will require expanding the network of protected areas around the globe and improving the surveillance, location selection, and connectivity of them on land and sea. There are signs of progress. On February 19th, the U.S. made its official return to the Paris Climate Accords. The move to rejoin the 125 other nations that signed onto the agreement in 2015 symbolized a shift in policy for the U.S., the country with the second highest carbon emissions after China. But it also entails financial support for climate-friendly development from the U.S. and other industrialized countries to poorer nations. Global meetings on biodiversity and climate change are slated for 2021, emphasizing the need for a worldwide effort to address the challenges laid out in the UNEP report. Guterres struck a hopeful tone, suggesting that human ingenuity was up to the task. Quote, this report shows that we have the knowledge and the ability to meet these challenges, he said. Still, he said that efforts to cut carbon emissions, stem the flow of pollutants into the global system, and elevate the protection of biodiversity must begin anew in 2021. It's a make it or break it year indeed, Guterres said. John Cannon is a staff features writer with Manga Bay. I'll include links to his other articles, and his social media. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
That's this week's episode of Best in Climate for Earth Feels.
Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.